Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Susanna Greer, and I am the Director of Clinical Cancer Research and Immunology at the American Cancer Society. I want to thank you for being with us here virtually for the nationwide launch of the American Cancer Society ResearchHERS campaign. I'm your moderator for our panel discussion today, and I'm joining you from my home in Atlanta, Georgia. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge and thank some of our key presenting sponsors who are supporting this effort from across the country. Chevron in San Francisco, Lilly Oncology in Indiana, Massachusetts General Hospital Cancer Center in Eastern New England, Northwell Health in Greater New York City, Pfizer in Knowledge Corridor, the University of Cincinnati Healthcare in Cincinnati, and Zangmaster Cancer Center in Columbus. I'd like to also thank several other sponsors who are appearing on your screen as well. Thank you all for your generous support, which is more critical now than ever. I know that we are living through what can only be described as an unprecedented time, but I am so encouraged to see such strong support for this important movement to advance cancer research. It truly demonstrates that we can continue to stand together even when we are apart. ResearchHERS is a movement that shines light on the incredible discoveries made by women. It also empowers women leaders to support the American Cancer Society's National Research Program, which funds some of the brightest female minds in cancer research. Simply put, it's women fundraising to support women-led research. Today, we're going to hear from some of the women helping to lead this effort in their own communities, and from a phenomenal ACS-funded investigator who's making invaluable contributions and discoveries in cancer research. For me, ResearchHERS is also a very personal campaign. Prior to joining the American Cancer Society as a staff member, I was a faculty member and cancer researcher and was funded by an American Cancer Society grant. The American Cancer Society helped to launch not only my independent career in cancer research, but led to the training of graduate students and postdoctoral fellows in my lab. I know from personal experience how far the impact of ACS funding can extend. I also know firsthand the challenges of being a woman in science and research. As a new assistant professor, I was newly pregnant and then also a new mom. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to share with you today, I remembered that feeling of looking around my department and not seeing many other women, and certainly not seeing anyone else who is in my same situation of challenging being a new mom and running a cancer research lab. I would have really benefited from something like ResearchHERS. Knowing other women who were going through a similar situation to me and who had successfully gone through similar periods in their own careers would have been just amazing. Such a support network. Science is incredibly competitive, and that's a good thing, but it can also be very isolating, and that's not a great thing. Women helping women can help reduce that isolation. We're all truly in this together, no matter our careers. And we've come here together today as advocates in support of women in science and those who will be inspired to become scientists. We've come together in support of those we've loved and lost to cancer, and in support of each other. So thank you for taking a stand and joining us. We will have time for a Q&A during this panel, so feel free to add your questions in the comment box throughout the webcast. Now, we are honored to have three special guests with us today to lend their voices to the discussion and their leadership to the campaign. Joining us live are Connie Lindsey, who is the Executive Vice President and Head of Corporate Social Responsibility and Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Northern Trust in Chicago. Dr. Debra Patt, a practicing oncologist and breast cancer specialist in Austin, Texas, and an Executive Vice President of Texas Oncology. And Dr. Pam Keeger, who is an ACS-funded researcher and Associate Professor of Biomedical Engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you all for joining the webcast today. So first, to get us started, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to share a bit about themselves. Let us know, why are you passionate about the ResearchHERS effort and supporting women in science and cancer research? Connie, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you, and greetings. Thank you to everyone joining us from all over the country today. I bring you greetings from my home in Chicago. I am most interested and just enthusiastic about the research and the work that's being done for a number of reasons. Number one, cancer has certainly personally affected my life and those of individuals whom I love. I've lost friends and family members to cancer. Secondly, it is the importance of the voices of women and young girls who look to women researchers as role models. It is letting them know that what they dream, they can be because they can see it. And as we continue to do research, there are opportunities for us to be a part of improving some of the economic and health disparities in underserved communities for whom cancer is often not just a devastating diagnosis, but there's also a deep need for additional support and help and research. So I'm honored and thrilled to be a part.
Thank you, Connie. Dr. Patt, same question for you. Could you introduce yourself and tell us why you are passionate about the ResearchHERS effort?
Sure. So I'm calling you from Austin. I'm a vice president here of Texas Oncology for Policy and Strategic Initiatives. And I'm passionate about cancer research and the ResearchHERS initiative because research cures cancer and empowered women empower women. It's the seed of the investment in research for women that grows to the tree that develops the fruit that the rest of us eat from. And it's only through those efforts that we can continue to grow and nourish investigation, particularly among women. Personally, I was a young investigator at the MD Anderson as a fellow and was a recipient of a grant for research as a young investigator. And through that, it actually shaped my career path because my interest in health services research and how policy and health services research and clinical informatics intersect has shaped my career path moving forward and helps me think about clinical decision support as an investigator and how that ties to clinical care delivery and operations. So I'll say again, that seed had to get planted for the tree to grow and for us to be role models for other women, because it wasn't until really I was a fellow that I had the ability to have women as mentors, which has been incredibly meaningful for me. So I think the ResearchHERS initiative is so important because it allows us to give investments in women and their research, allow them to contribute to that story. I also think maybe differently than our male counterparts, having grant-funded research allows us to give a longer lead to that research. It gives us a greater reach for that research to be meaningful and facilitates our professional development, which may have some external biases that without the objective research grant award or titles that empower our educational initiatives could be more subjective.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Patt. Dr. Keeger, same question for you. Please introduce yourself and share with us why you're passionate about the ResearchHERS effort.
Thanks. I'm joining you from Madison, Wisconsin. You're actually in my basement right now. And I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. I've personally found having women as colleagues, as mentors is essential. And I've very much enjoyed the different perspectives that women bring to science. For example, my research is in ovarian cancer, so a female-dominated or female-only cancer, and we bring different perspectives and different questions that we are going to ask. We face different challenges than our male colleagues, and so having additional opportunities to support us and provide mentoring networks, I think, is essential.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all so much. All right, well, I'm excited. Let's get started. I think, Connie, I'd like to pose the first question to you as we wait for questions to come in through the comment box. So, Connie, as you know, 1 in 3 Americans will battle cancer in their lifetime. It can be really hard to believe, quite frankly, that a single person can make a difference, but collectively, we're a force like no other. So for the ResearcHERS program, this force is actually led and championed by our program ambassadors, women who are bringing this movement to life in our communities and across the country and influencing others to support women-led cancer research efforts. Words of support are what I would love to hear. So what words of encouragement do you have for those committed ambassadors who are watching right now, or those who are considering supporting this program?
Well, the first thing is thank you. Whether you are already supporting, our deepest gratitude to you for getting into the process, for doing what you can wherever you are with what you have to support the ResearchHERS cancer research movement. Secondly, if you're considering getting involved, and oftentimes people will say to me, well, I don't have a lot of money or I don't have a lot of time. There is a quote that I share with people, and it is, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping in a closed room with a mosquito. All of us can do something. So I encourage you to consider your circumstance, your situation, and what it is that you can do to join us. We are here to support you. And most importantly, we're here to support those who are affected by cancer, those who are looking to us and who so desperately need our advocacy, our intellect, and our financial support for research. We know that when a woman puts her mind to something, big things can happen. We need to make sure that our voices are heard and that we are supporting each other, that wherever we are in the world or in our stage of life, throughout that sequence of life, there is an important part that you can play. So I implore, encourage, and joyfully request and ask that you join us. And if you're already an ambassador, once again, I thank you so very much for your support.
Thank you, Connie. I love what you said. Two things really stuck out to me. All of us can do something. And when we put our minds to something, really big things can happen. So it's fantastic. And I think, Dr. Keeger, I'd like to kind of pivot off of that to ask you questions about some big things that you've done. I think we're all curious. Would you share with us a little bit about your research and its implications for patients?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, as my title says, I'm actually an engineer. I'm not a clinical scientist. What I do is I'm using engineering tools to try to study cancer so that we can get a better idea of how to control it. So, for example, I'm interested in how ovarian cancer metastasizes throughout the body. To study this, we could use animal models or we could look at patient data, but if we really want to control things, we need a system where we can play with individual variables. And so that's what we do as engineers. We develop those in vitro systems. We use them to look at how different interactions between different cell types lead to differences, what we can do to then intervene and control and slow down metastasis. The other thing I do as an engineer is that since we're collecting all this experimental data that's very quantitative, we can use computational modeling to understand it better, to try to find out where those interactions are and where those specific weak points really are to go after. So that's what I'm doing. And I've been very grateful that the ACS has been supportive of this, sort of out of the mainstream of cancer research. I'm not doing the same stuff that I think we've all been doing. And I think what's really useful, though, is having all these different approaches, having the traditional approaches, having the clinical data, having the animal model data, and having these new approaches that new technologies are enabling us to try to bring it together and come up with answers faster. And so I think that's another advantage that I've noticed for women in research is that a lot of us do work really well in these kind of teams where we can interact and we can exchange information, and it's really about a collective goal rather than an individual accomplishment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have followed your career for a long time and will share with the women on the phone today. Dr. Keeger is just incredibly impressive, and we're so lucky to have her as an ACS grantee and very lucky to have her on the call today. Dr. Patt, I'd like to, maybe we can bring you in for a different perspective. Dr. Keeger's an engineer. You are a clinician, and Dr. Keeger nicely spelled out that it takes all of us working together to run the spectrum of clinical work to animal models to new technologies. And we are in a place right now where I think all of us are working very hard together. Could you share with us a little bit about the impact the pandemic has had on cancer patients and cancer research?
Sure, absolutely. So the pandemic has been something very challenging for us all to navigate. I think particularly for cancer patients and cancer research, there's the obvious data that's out there that suggests that when cancer patients are impacted by coronavirus directly, that they have a threefold increase in mortality over an average patient. So that's a direct effect. But the secondary effects have been numerous. In order to make our cancer centers a safer place, we've had to reduce volumes. As we know, we see the most vulnerable patients. My practice happens to see about half of Texans with cancer across our 221 sites of service, and we've reduced our volumes in clinic by about 80%. It's been a dramatic operational change. We've also seen screening stop. Mammography has not occurred in many of our communities where we're trying to socially distance. Colonoscopies have not occurred. In addition to people not getting screening and having early cancer diagnosis, symptoms have gone neglected. I happened to have the hospital service last week, and I saw numerous cases of advanced cancer present because individuals had neglected symptoms much longer than they would have normally felt comfortable with: profound weight loss, dizziness, advanced cancer presentation, really because as people have a fear of going out into the community, they have a greater tendency to delay going to seek medical treatment. And then cancer doesn't stop for a plague, right? Most patients who have cancer, especially advanced cancer, require continued treatment. And so this is not something that we can just put on pause for several months. Cancer research has been a challenge. Our patients that are currently enrolled on clinical trials, as we have about 70 clinical trials open in my cancer center here, they continue, but we have delayed the opening of new trials because of the challenges coronavirus has brought to research. So there are new hurdles. Research will be more difficult. It will be more expensive. And I think most importantly, probably, are the collateral damages that have occurred as a result of the pandemic. In Texas, where we have 28 million individuals but 17% uninsured, when unemployment goes from 3% to 15%, our uninsured rate will go up considerably. Those uninsured patients in my state are 6 times more likely to present with advanced cancer over an insured patient, and they're more likely to die of their disease. We also see challenges in the contribution to philanthropy. So while coronavirus-related philanthropy has soared, and kudos to all the ACS is doing in that regard for coronavirus-related philanthropy, but we found that other philanthropic recipients have had substantially diminished contributions. That's critical because organizations like the ACS and so many of our other organizations play a critical role. I think those collateral damages, or those tertiary side effects that we see as related to unemployment, decreased wages, furloughs, are going to really have an impact for some time to come. So this has been a challenge on many levels, will greatly impact research. And I think that ResearchHERS is one effort that will help us navigate this climate more effectively.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Patt. You did a really wonderful job of outlining just how challenging this time is and how difficult in so many aspects. I'm seeing lots of questions about inspiration, and I think it's interesting to reflect on the fact that many of us, if we are cancer patients or survivors or caregivers, have been so inspired by you and your colleagues and are really grateful for all that you are doing to help us during what can only be described as just an extraordinary time in history. So thank you. I also think about folks who may be inspired to pursue careers in clinical service or in research because of what they're seeing now. And so I think, Dr. Keeger, I'd like to ask you first, but could you tell us what inspired you to pursue a career in research? I think that would be really interesting for our listeners to hear.
It's actually really hard to put a finger on it. I always liked science. I always liked math. I think, like a lot of kids who like science and math, I thought, okay, I'll be a doctor. I'll pursue an MD. And as part of my undergraduate experience, you get the message, okay, if you think you want to go to medical school, having research experience will make you a more competitive candidate. So I tried research and I really liked it. So I then started to think, well, maybe this is actually the right path. But I was a chemistry major and I didn't think I wanted to be a chemist. And so I started considering around and then landed on engineering as kind of a way to bring the mathematics back in. In terms of moving into ovarian cancer, that was actually inspired by watching a close friend of my sister fight and unfortunately lose her battle with ovarian cancer. And I found like a lot of people with a scientific background, when somebody in the family or a friend of the family gets sick, you get asked questions. And so I started looking more into it and got very interested in it.
Oh, that's awesome. You and I have more in common than I knew. I was a chemistry major as well and also really liked it, but didn't want to be a chemist. I think it's just amazing how many women try science and math for the first time and then realize, oh my God, I am really good at this. And what a great feeling. Dr. Patt, do you have a different perspective? What inspired you to pursue your career?
So, Dr. Greer, like Dr. Keeger, I also was interested in math and science, and also dabbled in research early in my professional path. So, when I was in college, I did research in molecular biology. My bet is Dr. Keeger was probably better at the math than I was. So I dabbled in molecular biology and actually started medical school like Dr. Keeger. I thought, I'll be a doctor and a scientist. So I started in an MD PhD program thinking that I would do molecular biology. But at Baylor College of Medicine, where I went to medical school, they had this program where they put us in the clinics right away. And one of the first women that I met in the clinic, my first year in medical school, was an 86-year-old woman that was dying of metastatic cervical cancer. And for those of you who understand a little bit about preventable cancers, you know that really people today shouldn't be dying of metastatic cervical cancer because that is almost an entirely preventable disease, both because of screening and now because of vaccination. And it sort of put me on a different path. I decided that I didn't want to pursue molecular biology, that I was much more interested in how healthcare data, health services research, public policy, and care delivery really influenced the health of Americans, of people. And so it sort of put me down a different path. And I finished my master's in public health and with an interest in policy and health services research. And I do a lot of that today. So today I'm the editor-in-chief of a clinical cancer informatics journal for ASCO. I do a lot of clinical informatics research and decision support. And I spend a lot of time on policy. I actually eventually did finish my PhD in healthcare economics and health services research. And so, actually those early interests and having experiences to help guide and direct them really did lead me to where I am today. And I use that on a day-to-day basis. I use that daily as I think about healthcare delivery for Texans. I work with the Texas Medical Association. I've testified before Congress on healthcare policy. So I'll say it's those early interests and those early investments that has really shaped where I am today that were critical in my professional development. And that's one of the reasons why ResearchHERS, I think, is such an important investment in research efforts for women, because without that kind of influence, my career path would be very different today.
Oh, wow. Those are two really great stories. I loved hearing from both Dr. Patt and Dr. Keeger about your career trajectory. And Connie, I think I'd like to pose this question to you. So a lot of what we just heard from Drs. Keeger and Patt was about decisions and how they made their decisions moving forward, and about their early interests and the investments that were made in them. What would you say to young girls now who are making similar decisions about their careers and maybe thinking about careers in math and science and research and clinical focus?
Well, I'd add my voice to what both of the doctors have said. So I started out in college and undergrad in engineering and then finished in finance. So for me, the curiosity that comes with a science, technology, engineering, or math background, there is the integration of what mathematics and science has to do with how decisions are made. In my career that I have today, the interconnectedness of society and business and how that all comes together in ways that allow us to make optimal decisions, the authenticity that is required with leadership so that young girls, as I said before, they can't be what they can't see. So if they see diversity and inclusion in the roles of science, there are scientists today, women of color, who are assisting with research as a refers to as a result of the novel coronavirus. So it is this notion of inclusion. As the past national president of Girl Scouts of the USA, I had the opportunity to see young girls all around the world and what their interests and aspirations were in science, in engineering. But it was equally as important for us to show up for them in ways that perhaps they had not seen, being able to ask questions, to understand how important they are to the future of research and what that can mean and how fulfilling that can be. And as we connect one to another in answering the difficult questions about research and how it can't just be limited as options and opportunities for those who can afford it or avail themselves of it, to be a bridge and a voice for those who are not able to gain access. That's been part of the advocacy work that I've done my entire career in working with girls and women, as well as the work that I do within the corporation. The fundraising work that is so important to ensure that our amazing researchers have the capacity to do the work that they must do in order to find answers and then to question those answers so that we can have better outcomes for individuals who are diagnosed, affected by, and suffer today from cancer. On a personal note, my husband is a multiple myeloma survivor, which is a type of blood cancer. So I have deep and abiding interest in ensuring that this work continues in a way that is meaningful, in a way that can be replicated and sized such that so many people can benefit. He has benefited from the research that's been done in the field of multiple myeloma. And so I have every reason in the world, both love and compassion for him, but also for others who are going through a similar experience. And what was said before about having to go into the hospital now in terms of as the result of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's a very different world. I go to every treatment, every appointment with him, but I can't go with him now. So the physical distancing affects all of us in very many different ways. So I am on this call today and in this session today because it is real, it is still happening, it affects all of us and all of the heroes and sheroes that we cannot see who are making it possible for lives to be lengthened, treatments to be advanced. And I am here for the long haul in the indefatigable pursuit of finance, education, awareness, articulating the issues, and continuing to be a support in any way that makes sense.
Well, Connie, we're so grateful for you, and what a wonderful career trajectory you've had, and how fortunate all these young women are to have been influenced and impacted by you. You helped tee me up for something I'm really interested in, and I think Dr. Keeger will be a great person if she's willing to share maybe a little more of a personal side, because you mentioned, Connie, capacity to do what we want to do. And you also mentioned that we're all being impacted in very different ways by the pandemic. Dr. Keeger, if I'd like to know if you'd be willing to share with us how the pandemic has impacted you, maybe on a personal side. Are there roles that you have had to take on in your personal life and your family life that have maybe impacted your ability to do research, and or you could also speak for other female colleagues that maybe you've talked to during this time?
Yeah, definitely. So my lab has shut down early on in this, partly for safety for lab members, partly to help with the rationing of personal protective equipment, because we obviously use gloves and face masks and shields that were needed by other people. And so as a result, we're all working from home. And I think initially a lot of us sort of had this like, oh, yay, working from home is so much easier than, less distraction. But of course, at the same time, our schools and our daycares either shut down or, in the case of the daycares, have limitations to support truly essential workers. So I've now learned how to be a homeschooling to a third grader and a 4K. That is not something I ever intended to do, and nor is it in any way compatible with a professional life. I spent 45 minutes with my student this morning discussing his results from one of his computer simulations with a 4-year-old smashing a stuffed animal in my head. So it is a lot harder to get work done, but at the same time, then it makes you realize that for some people, it isn't that much harder, particularly some of my older and in particular male colleagues have been saying, oh, it's great. I have all this time to write extra grants. I'm finishing up papers and doing great thinking. And I hear sort of this like low level of panic among my female colleagues that we always felt like our work-life balance was hard, and it's hard for every working mom. It's now become nearly impossible for almost every working mom. And that the gap we were already feeling may be becoming a huge goal, like a huge valley that how are we going to get past that? And I don't have answers for it. We're all doing our best day to day. But I think that's part of the reason why I was willing to find the extra time to do this campaign, because I think women in particular are going to need additional support to keep their careers going after COVID, to rebound from some of these effects. I think research funding had finally gotten to a decent level at the federal, and by decent, I mean 10% of grants were being funded, which is still really low. But that was the best it's been in my entire career. And now I worry that will go away. And when it was really low, for me, ACS was the one who was there. ACS is the one who gave me my first major grant. And that was at a time that I think NIH was funding around the 7th or 8th percentile. National Cancer Institute was funding around 7 or 8% of grants instead of 10% of grants. And that 2% is a huge amount of people that get lost.
Wow. Well, thank you for your willingness to be so candid with us. You're right. Work-life balance is hard always. And now has reached, I think, a logarithmic level of challenge. I can't say I like how you described, but I appreciate your description of a low-level panic that you have heard from your colleagues. And you're right, women, we are going to need additional support. Dr. Patt, I'd like to pose maybe a related question to you, but perhaps even broader. I certainly would welcome your comments on the situation now, but even broader, I think our listeners would be really interested to hear, Dr. Patt, what do you see are the biggest challenges for women in science and research? And maybe a two-sided question, how would you be willing to share ways that you have personally kind of managed these challenges?
Sure. I think it's a really important question. I think it's really important to talk about. Because I think that we all operate in navigating this new landscape before us with better navigation tools, which is more information. So I'll say that external biases remain. There is not a female leader that I know that has not been subject to them. And whether it's sexual discrimination or gender discrimination, or trying to manage how you have a child and continue to have professional development, or being on a different track to having tenure, getting your research funded in a timely manner. Those are challenges that remain. And I'll tell you that among all of those, there is not a successful professional researcher that I know that's a woman that has not had to navigate some of those challenges. So they remain. So, just being candid, know that that's out there. And I do have words of wisdom. born from scars of experience. Um, One, to be your own ruler. Know that there is going to be a benchmark that other people will always measure you by, whether it's that, oh, you didn't care enough about the science that you went on to have a child or three.
Thank you.
That you need to measure yourself, as opposed to knowing that other people will always be judging you for the decisions that you've made. Be your own ruler, and be comfortable with your own decisions. I would say never complain and never explain is a second rule that I have, because know that other people don't always need to know that you have to leave work early because you have to see your kids' performance. Maybe you just have to leave work early. I think having good partners is really important. Having women mentors is excellent. A very helpful spouse is probably the most important thing, and a peer group that you can draw upon. And I will say to invest in your professional development. So I think as women are more subject to subjective evaluation of their professional accomplishments, the objective measures of grant funding and the degrees that you have behind your name and the leadership roles that you've held are objective benchmarks that no one can contradict. And so I think those are good pearls of wisdom: to be your own ruler, never complain and never explain, recognizing that you're not going to be everything to everyone all the time and you're going to miss some stuff, to have good partners and invest in your own professional development.
Oh, Dr. Patt, that was awesome. I feel like we need a list of, we need to share that list out. Thank you. Well,
I do want to, I agree with the general advice, but actually I've sort of taken a different path in terms of, I do explain where I'm going, because I think it's important to normalize that you can be a human being and be in science. And maybe that's more of less of an issue in other parts, but particularly in the academic world, there has sort of been this, like, you should give your entire life to science. And I don't think that that's true. And I actually don't think that makes you a good scientist. So I do actually tell people when I'm leaving to go to do something related to my family, because I want them to understand that that's okay, that that's part of us building a healthy culture in science, is to allow that, and to still, again, as you're saying, have the objective things, like I've done well still. So for people to see that and to see that that's normal.
This is Connie. If I could add to that as well, I think it is critically important that we operate from a space of authenticity and that each of us has different approaches. All of us are not moms. All of us may or may not have a partner. So when I think of this, I think of it in the context of inclusion and equity. As a woman of color, it is not just the barriers that I've faced as a woman, but certainly race and ethnicity have a lot to do with the barriers that I face. And so I agree wholeheartedly that it is important for us to be authentic, also to make sure that we are clear about what it is we are expecting from our work experience. And I refer to it as work-life integration, because if we're ever going to advance the discussion about childcare, elder care, or whatever those different needs might be in the workplace, we are not maximizing talent if we're not showing up as who we are. I define diversity, equity, and inclusion in this way. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance, but equity says I get to pick the song. And I think we're in the phase of this work, whether it's cancer research, women in business, we need to be able to pick the song to which we choose to dance. And it means that we are inclusive of experiences of all of us. How can we best create an environment, certainly not expecting nirvana, but create an environment that the places from which I come, the gifts and talents that I bring to whatever my work might be, it is as accepted as the norm, whatever the norm is. And we know that there is no such thing as a norm. So I encourage young girls and women to know who they are, to stand in their truth, or as my grandmother used to say to us, cover all the ground you stand on. So let us not select and act out on what we believe normal is, but to really inquire and understand what it takes, the extra effort, attention, and intention it takes to ensure that we are inclusive, creating equitable platforms that will truly, once executed well, will benefit far more than just a singular focus and view.
Mm. Oh, you ladies are just awesome. All right, Connie, I'm going to put you on the spot again because Dr. Krieger and Dr. Patt were willing to level set with us. So I'd like to ask a similar question to you, and that is, can you tell us, do you think the challenges that women in science face, are they similar or are they different from those faced by leaders in the corporate world? And maybe how have you personally navigated challenges that you've faced as well?
I think there are systemic and structural biases for women and people of color who are working within systems that were not necessarily created with them in mind. So these structural and systemic biases, whether it is the perception that people have of what a scientist looks like. If you ask, do they typically see a woman in that role? Do they typically see a person of color in that role? The same is true in business. So how do we address the systems and structures that preclude us from having equal and equitable access? And it is important for us to think about that. And throughout my career, yes, I've experienced systemic structural bias, racism, all of those things that can happen in one's career. But I've had good sponsors, mentors, coaches. I've had the support of a good network of women. And equally as important is something that I learned from my mother is resilience, being able to navigate the whitewaters of all that can happen to us in whatever our career choices are, but being courageous enough to speak up and developing the ability to build networks and allies in meetings. If we have other women in meetings and we see that one of our women is not being recognized or asked, we should encourage that person to be involved and engaged. If I'm in a meeting and a woman says something and a guy repeats it, I go back and say, well, this is what name of the woman said. This is important. Let's hear and understand what she says. And that requires the kind of courage to be able to stand up for that. And I know it's different for each of us based on where we are in our careers, but we have to be willing to do that. And if we don't model that behavior for other women and young girls, they won't believe that it can be done. It is not easy. I often say I have to be willing to stand alone for a particular subject, or certainly in this case, when I'm talking about equity and inclusion, it is my willingness and my courageous ability to stand alone, but also to build allies. We're not talking in ResearchHERS about excluding men, but what we are saying is we are investing in women. And so with us standing together as allies, we're going to benefit not just women, but the entire population. But our focus right now is investing in women because we know that there's amazing research that women are doing.
Oh, thank you, Connie. Hearing from all of you, this is the best I've felt in a long time. So thank you. I'd like to pivot to another, what I think is a really positive spot, because Dr. Krieger, I don't want to let you get off the line and off this webinar without telling us a little bit about your most recent grant from the American Cancer Society. You have a Mission Boost grant, which is a very special grant from the ACS that is a reinvestment in some of our most outstanding investigators. So could you share a little bit about what that grant in particular has meant or is meaning for your work?
Yeah, so I'm really sad that we're not working on it as much right now because it is in the state where we really need to be in the lab. What the grant is for, in our prior grant, we had used one of our in vitro systems and we had found this interesting interaction where an immune cell seems to make it easier for the cancer cell to spread to a new site in ovarian cancer. And we did some very preliminary animal testing and we found the same thing. And it was sort of at this stage, we didn't really know what to do with it next. I'm not going to go run a clinical trial. I'm a PhD, and it's certainly not ready for a clinical trial. We need to do some more refinement and understanding of what the best steps are. And the Mission Boost isn't intended specifically for research sort of at that point, at the point of like, okay, let's see, can we go forward? So in the first 2 years, it may take us a little longer than we thought with COVID, Our plan is to do some more of those animal studies, do longitudinal studies to see if by interfering with this mechanism, can we actually slow tumor growth down in mice? But at the same time, be collecting patient samples and be looking to see how prevalent this mechanism is in patients. That's another area where COVID has actually really challenged our life, is even if we were in lab, we're not allowed to get those samples because of the potential risk of transmission, since we don't have enough testing going on right now. So I don't know how quickly we'll be able to get back to that, even once we get back to the lab and can do the animal work. But the goal of this is, if we see promising results, the mission boost then allows us a second stage based on the preliminary results. So the best ideas hopefully got into the first stage, and the ones that pan out will get to the second stage, where we will do an early clinical test. I have a clinical collaborator, and they've helped me to design what is sort of that like first stage you should do in humans before you would motivate a giant trial, like some of the trials that Dr. Patt was talking about that are ongoing. And that's also an area where COVID is going to make it very challenging until that's under control, is to do these early trials, because you need to accrue patients, and we can't do that at this point. So unfortunately, it's not making as fast a progress as I would like. That's part of research, is learning how to accept slowness in progress, but usually it's a little more under your control than this.
Well, we are extraordinarily excited about you and what you're doing, and we will be ready for those results when they come, with the understanding that, of course, things will be a little slower now, but honestly, with people like you on our side, there's going to be some amazing, amazing science that comes out of this study. So thank you. I think, Dr. Patt, I'd like to ask, before we get off the phone, maybe one more question to you. And that would be, could you just tell us, if you're willing to just level set with us, what has been your biggest challenge as a female in your field?
I think Connie did a great job of discussing that we have, there are a lot of systematic biases, I think, that women encounter that can be variable. And I think that trying to resolve those is challenging. And we bring to that our own personal issues. I have 3 children. My first during residency, my second during fellowship, and my third when I was done with training. So navigating that with an incredible husband who's also a physician, and thankfully an incredible partner, it has been a challenge to be a leader and a researcher in cancer care. So I think that those same challenges are pervasive. They're not going away. I'm so grateful that there are wonderful mentors like Dr. Greer and Dr. Keeger to help with the next generation of women that need guidance down this path. And I have to say, I personally invest in it. So I'm involved with other groups that fund research for women as well, and take personal time out to mentor women, because I think it's a better path forward. And I'll just call out, because nobody has called it out on this call, but Dr. Greer, you having the position that you have at the American Cancer Society as a researcher and a leader in cancer research for the ACS is such an incredible and unusual position for a woman. So I would reflect that back to you and say, what counsel do you have, and how do you see this really putting forth cancer research for our future?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, first of all. I think everything the three of you have said, honestly, has been a thought that's run through my mind at some point during my career. I cannot imagine doing anything other than what I'm doing right now. But I got here because other people turned around and reached their hands down and helped pull me up. And it's something I try to remember every day, is that I need to look behind me. And each of you has echoed similar comments and pulled those folks up who are behind me, who will, quite frankly, do even more than I ever could have imagined doing myself. So the opportunity to work with women like you, and honestly, every woman who is listening today, it just blows my mind, and I'm really grateful. So thank you. I hate to let you all go, but we're going to have to end soon. But Connie, I would like, I think, to close with you. I have a two-part question. The first is a tough one, but is there some advice that you could share with our ambassadors who are fundraising for us in what can only be described as a really tough climate? So that's my first part. And then the second part is, if there's just one thing that you could ask people to do to help right now, what would it be?
Thank you. First of all, to our ambassadors, stay with it. We need your help and support. You, wherever you are, all around the country, are so critical. You are that one person who, when connected to this broader work of researchers, you're making all the difference. Without you, this work cannot be done. And collectively, we are a force to be reckoned with. And cancer is that force that we are moving. We might be doing it incrementally, but without you, it cannot be done at all. So we are all grateful that you are there with us. Continue to seek, knock, and ask, because as was said before, we want to continue to invest and broaden this, even with the challenges and headwinds that we face in light of the pandemic. Stay with us. We're here to answer your questions, to be encouraged by it. What I've heard on the call is energized me, and I'm a pretty high energy person. But knowing that there are these women who are incredibly brilliant and talented that we're lifting as we climb, that if someone had not spoken up to ask, why are there not more women researchers? Why is it that we are not seeing the kind of investments being made in women doing research? And the big why, how long and when will we be able to say that there is an equitable way for women to do research? So stay with it. You are making a difference. We see you, we hear you, you matter. And women are not what is the matter. We know that we matter. So when we lift our voices strong and high, when we invest in those things that are meaningful to us, and I have to say, when we show the kind of love and compassion to one another, we will ultimately have the kind of impact that we seek. So we remain grateful. We thank you for what you are doing. We are still encouraged. While you heard the difficulties and the challenge, we are unbowed by what we have faced or what we yet have to face, because we're not alone. We are with you and you are with us. And so as all of us are doing the work in the places where we are, I wish you divine good health, a connection to another human being, even though we're practicing physical distancing, socially and spiritually, I believe we are connected. And while many of us are wearing face coverings, if our eyes are the window to the soul, let us look into the eyes of our fellow human being and wish them great peace, great health, great hope. So thank you for all you're doing. And I look forward to seeing you in a research lab somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. The American Cancer Society is a top supporter of women in science, and proud that almost half of the American Cancer Society grantees are women, most of them in their early careers. Since 1946, the American Cancer Society has invested more than $4.9 billion in cancer research, which is more than any non-governmental organization. That achievement, and the reason our research program got off the ground at all, was also thanks to a woman. ACS volunteer Mary Lasker helped raise the first $1 million to establish and fund the Society's groundbreaking research program to find more and better treatments, to uncover factors that may cause cancer, and to improve cancer patients' quality of life. Since the beginning, women have led the way, and the American Cancer Society, with your help, is ensuring that they continue to do so. As we conclude today's webcast, I want to thank Connie, Dr. Patt, and Dr. Keeger for joining us and for all that each of you do. I also want to extend our appreciation to all of you who were able to tune in, and for your commitment to raise at least $2,500 in support of women-led cancer research. We hope your involvement in this campaign is both fun and meaningful. So what happens next? Well, throughout the months of May and June, you are joining nearly 1,000 ambassadors from across the country to create a surge of energy around sustaining the investment in female investigators and shining a spotlight on the important contributions of women in science. Following today's launch, you'll receive a communication from the American Cancer Society and a short video. The video will provide more details on next steps, so please be sure to check it out. And for all of you who are joining us today from across the country, please know that your support means so much to so many at this critical time. Thank you all. There is a lot at risk right now, including the fight against cancer. Women-led research is integral in that fight, and we need you to sign up right now as ResearchHERS ambassadors or make a direct donation online to support women-led cancer research. The website is in the chat box and is on screen momentarily. Again, many thanks. Please be safe and be well, everyone.